Good evening, everyone. This is Wacana, the English edition, and I'm Tamina Kausji, taking you through another episode of the show that gives our international and English-speaking viewers an insight into the political, economic, as well as social landscape of Malaysia. Tonight, of course, we are discussing the hot topic of the month, transparency and accountability when it comes to the MACC. So, as mentioned by the Prime Minister, Datuk Sri Ismail Sabri Yaakob, all quarters, quote-unquote, should give space to the authorities to thoroughly investigate allegations of share purchases involving MACC Chief Commissioner Tan Sri Azam Baki. However, our discussion today surpasses just the MACC and also goes beyond into the culture of corruption and accountability and what all of this needs to mean, particularly given the economic constraints of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that there has never been a better time for Malaysia to get her house in shape. With all of that in mind, we have an excellent panel of experts joining us live here in the studios tonight at Sinar Daily, and I have the pleasure of introducing now, first and foremost, Cynthia Gabriel, Founding Director of Centre to Combat Corruption and Cronyism, C4. She is also joined by Ira Azahari, Senior Manager with Democracy and Governance Unit with the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs, Ideas Malaysia. And our panel is rounded off by none other than Dr. Owe Sun, Political Analyst and Senior Fellow of Singapore Institute of International Affairs. A very good evening, everyone. How is everyone doing?
Very good,
Well,
thank you.
yeah.
All
Very
right.
much.
Yes, exactly. So this is the last Thursday of the month, and as we do on Sinar Daily, we look at the hot topic. So the hot topic, of course, regardless of so many other issues that have also been in the news cycle, is, of course, MACC, corruption, transparency, accountability. I would like to get the ball rolling by asking Cynthia, is MACC's integrity at risk over the ongoing Azam Baki case?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me on the show. And that's a very important question to start this topic with. We've been grappling with this whole issue of the Azam Baki corporate ownership issue since September, actually.
That's correct.
And then it kind of snowballed when Professor Terence Gomez, one of the members of the prevention panel, resigned. And it became then a very hot topic because there were many people who then started to realize what an important subject matter it was. Because we're talking really about the SPRM, the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission. The commission, the very institution that is tasked to actually enhance integrity, promote accountability, and investigate corruption cases at all levels of government. So here we are, in the midst of a crisis and a controversy involving the chief commissioner himself. And, you know, in this country, the more things snowball, the more things develop, the more it actually stays the same. We have more than a month of all this tension and lots of coverage on issues of integrity, MACC's integrity at risk, accountability, etc. But he's still there. And in this civil service culture of ours, there's very, very rare moments in which the civil servant or the high-ranking public officer or the politician would actually take a step back. Mm-hmm. It's just not within how it operates in this country. And so the risk that is associated with the institution he is in and he leads is now very much at stake. And I think the credibility of the MACC has been dragged down further because of the individual that is heading it. And the fact that he has to be accountable does not actually mean that the entire institution has to be dragged down. And I think that's where we need to discuss some very important points of how to redeem the MACC.
Absolutely. Fair point, Cynthia. Absolutely. Because what we need to focus on is how to move the conversation further and also move the action into something which actually results in institutional reforms, perhaps. Yeah. So with that in mind, though, let's very briefly touch upon the Tangkap Azam Baki protest. So 30 PACS participants from the rally which happened over the last weekend will be called in for questioning tomorrow at the IPD in Brickfields. Dr. O, from your perspective, what do such small uprisings amongst at least the urban Malaysian go to prove? particularly when it comes to our attitudes and how they've shifted when it comes to transparency and accountability in the last decade?
Well, of course, over the last decade, you would see a lot of these massive scales of street protests, such as the Bersih clean election movements and so on. So in comparison, this so-called arrest Azam Baki, street protest movement, it's a comparatively small one, with, I think, at the end, perhaps around 100 or so very activist-minded participants who still brave the various road closures and playing the sort of cat and mouse game with the authorities in terms of being able to finally just unfurl some of their banners and so on. So it was very, well, at least in my humble opinion, a very subdued protest.
Sure, yes,
morning,
as we're seeing on the visuals as well.
That morning I was about to go for an event to moderate a session at a forum, and I thought I would be caught up by the road closure and so on, but it turned out it was very smooth. I think I went to the venue within 5 minutes, and at the end of the day, unfortunately, I think the whole idea of perhaps rousing more attention towards this issue has not quite succeeded because, simply the scale of the protest is not as big as what would have happened quite a few years ago, let's say before 2018, when people are calling for clean elections and so on. Yeah.
Right, fair observation. Ira, I would like to keep it focused on the bigger picture, and let's talk about the processes which are currently involved, particularly when it comes to the MACC, selection of commissioners, and how this could be perhaps improved or strengthened.
Yeah, so I would first like to make the point that I think, whether or not Azam Baki broke the law, with his shareholding or, and his brother's involvement in it, that's a legal issue, right? But I think what we need to be concerned about is why is it that we don't know what the investigative process is? Where is the transparency in this whole thing, right? And I think as a people, we deserve to know what are the processes that are in place if our most high-ranking public official gets accused, very serious accusations of such a nature. So I think this needs to be highlighted very, very clearly, that the process itself is, even at Ideas, when we were trying to craft our statements and trying to think of how to respond, we were just like, actually, what's the investigative process? How do the 5 oversight committees in the MACC even work, right? So,
and if Ideas is pondering upon that,
exactly,
imagine the average Malaysian citizen.
Exactly. Yeah. You were right. And as Cynthia said, if Dr. Terence Gomez didn't tender his resignation and made public his letter, none of this probably would have come to light at all. So why is it that we don't even know what the process is to hold our highest ranking public officials accountable? And this brings me to the next part of your question, which is, what do we then do, right? So Ideas, C4, and the Bar Council and a couple of other civil society organizations have come up with proposals in 2015, 2016 actually. So it's been a few years to reform the MACC and make the MACC more independent, right? So to turn the MACC into a constitutional commission, to reform the process of appointments of commissioners. So one of the issues with this is also that the allegations against Azam Baki, it happened in 2015, 2016, when he was the director of investigations, right? So why was he then promoted as the chief commissioner with these allegations, very serious allegations, right? So for me, the value of the protest was, highlighting the fact that at the very least, he should be put on leave when such public serious allegations have been...
So at the bare minimum.
At the bare minimum.
Right.
And I think we have a right to expect that as the Malaysian public. So I think this issue hasn't been highlighted enough. What's the process? Like, if no one knows what the process
the
is...
expectations at the end of it.
Yes, exactly. So actually, this case could have been a really great precedent setting where if we knew what the process is and the process was followed, then we know, okay, in future cases, if more high-ranking public officials are accused like this, then okay, at least we know what's going to be done.
That's
but
how the process
issue is we don't
goes.
even know what's being done.
Right.
Yeah.
So moving on to Cynthia. Cynthia, I wanted to ask you, speaking about precedents, right, the latest TI Corruption Perception Index, CPI, is out. Malaysia has tumbled down 5 spots. Your thoughts on this and how this also correlates to what's happening in the wider ecosystem of public corruption?
Well, to put things in context, the Azam Baki controversy was not assessed as part of the 2021 Corruption Perception Index.
Fair enough. So the tumble down might be even further.
Yeah, so that will be felt for 2022 and many other scandals that could potentially pop up. For 2021, we had a number of issues, including the MACC itself, because you will remember there was this case of 25 million ringgit being stolen by some of the public officials. And these included issues of asset recovery of 1MDB's stolen money. And it was linked to the former spy chief, the intelligence chief. So when she was then in her court case, had a DNAA, which means that she was actually dismissed, but not amounting to acquittal. So she was actually then requesting for the assets to be returned to her. And it was then that they found out that there was some serious thievery that happened. And it implicated SPRM officials, MACC officials. So the Azam Baki controversy is not the first. And these things definitely contributed to the plunge of 5 rungs, to even drop 1 rung in the corruption perception
index. Yes, what does dropping even 1 rung actually mean when it comes to the country's entire economy and also tumble-down and trickle-down impacts on the rakyat?
Yeah, so there are 180 countries about there that are reviewed every year. And the Corruption Perception Index is a combination of different external stakeholders that actually review a country's performance based on its human rights, merits, freedom of information, expression, economy. So the World Economic Forum, the World Bank, etc., all have important voices in determining the performance of a country and how much they value transparency, accountability, and actually look at the financial health and wealth of a particular country. So the more corruption scandals and the more institutions appear to look inefficient or not independent, etc., then there are many ways in which an index can actually plunge. So to plunge 1 is actually a big deal. So to plunge 5 is actually a huge plunge. And I think we need to seriously assess. And I'm still waiting for an official statement from the Prime Minister, because I haven't seen one. And I think he should start taking things very seriously. So for this government, we've had 3 governments in 3 years, and the change of government last year, in the middle of last year, hasn't augured very well either, because it's not an elected government. It was also established from another internal coup. And these things actually don't work very well for our corruption perception index. So these are many factors.
From there, I would actually like to move along, because also we're now sitting on the wings of a possible future general election within this year itself. Dr. O, I wanted to connect that all back to, so can we now trust the MACC to self-regulate? Because of course, an institution is much larger than just one individual, even though it may currently be alleged that he has committed wrongdoings.
Well, I want to be blunt about this.
Go ahead.
Example, I think in our anti-corruption set of laws and regulations, there's this thing about if you know of certain corrupt practices and you do not report to MACC, you could be charged for not reporting. I think in more than one public forums, I have challenged MACC officers. What if I totally lose faith on MACC as a law enforcement agency, and I do know of some sort of corrupt practices, but I want to protect myself, right? And not report it to MACC, maybe reporting it to the media and so on, so that it comes into the public. But unfortunately, I could still be charged if I do so. Now, since we are talking about politics, you see, by continuing to protect Azam Baki, essentially entrenching him in the current position, I think this government will pay quite a hefty political price, if not now, certainly in the near future. So if I were the Prime Minister, if I were Ismail Sabri, I would be smart about this, since there's this drop of like 5 positions in the
Which
corruption
Cynthia
perception
so well elaborated upon the
yeah,
meanings of.
index. I will use this as an excuse to well, perhaps, well, you can either remove or you can transfer Azam Baki to some other less sensitive positions. Yeah, that is what I would do if I'm a smart politician and I have my political career in mind.
Right, so strategy and acumen. Okay, fair enough. Thank you for that, Dr. O. Ira, I'd like to move along to, if the integrity of MACC is in question, who then can Malaysians trust when it comes to overseeing corruption and transparency, accountability issues in the country?
Yeah, so I think that's a difficult question, right? Because, so for those who still fail to see how grave the situation is, he is the chief commissioner of the MACC, which is meant to be, the body that oversees anti-corruption work and investigates corruption. So, who then do we turn to? So, I mentioned earlier that ideas, C4, the Bar Council, and several other CSOs have proposed how MACC can be reformed. So that's the, how do we get MACC itself to be more independent? But the other thing that we actually have at the moment is, I'm not sure how many Malaysians know that we actually have a parliamentary select committee on public agencies, right?
Yes.
That is supposed to have the power, at least in theory, to not investigate, but at least to call up public officials who have, been compromised, whose integrity has been compromised, and at least try and investigate what I mentioned earlier. What are the processes that are being done to, keep this person accountable? And if you remember, this PSC did issue a statement that, they wanted to get Azam Baki into the PSC to be questioned, and then, he declined it, and there was a big controversy about that as well. And and that's the thing. Like, why is it that this is even happening? How is it that
the chief of the MACC can decline? Right.
Yes.
Fantastic. We'll end right there, Ira. So far we've been discussing the introduction to corruption, transparency, accountability issues. Fantastic. We'll be right back after this commercial to discuss what exactly and what reforms can the MACC adopt moving forth. See you then. Welcome back. You're still watching Wacana English with me, Tamina Kausji, and we're discussing today MACC, corruption, transparency, and accountability. Right, panelists, so now moving forth, how do we move towards reforming the MACC? Would you perhaps recommend something like an independent probe by the NAFCC, the National Anti-Financial Crime Center? Cynthia, your thoughts to begin with.
The MACC needs to be reformed, and this entire episode has shown why it needs to be reformed. It has shown us several things. For example, the Securities Commission was supposed to investigate the MACC, but a couple of days later we found that there was complaints about the Securities Commission being conflicted and there were potential scandals, etc. So it appears now like there could be a tit for tat, and that needs to be stopped. And this independent probe is perhaps the only solution and it needs to be something which is pretty high level in that sense, that needs to be undertaken by the Prime Minister himself, undertaken via an independent task force. We don't really recommend a Royal Commission of Inquiry, but even that is much better than MACC investigating themselves, because that is certainly not something which is going to elicit any greater public confidence. In fact, the trust deficit will go lower and lower. So right now, there is a panel in MACC investigating the whole issue, because one of the 5 oversight panels is actually a complaints panel that can actually investigate officials that may have committed malpractice and transgression. So that is definitely not something which is going to offer any solutions. The second was the Securities Commission. And the Securities Commission statements, the second one especially, had actually proven quite clearly that there were some serious contradictions between ownership issues, because Azam Baki said it was his brother that was managing his accounts, and Securities Commission said it was he himself. So the need for an independent probe is higher than ever. And the need for Azam Baki, we're not even asking for him to be removed permanently, but we're asking for him to go on garden leave, because he cannot in any way be interfering with the investigations. And the investigations need to look as independent as it can get to steer credibility and public confidence back into the MACC. And that is the most important thing. We also, as civil society, wanted to take this opportunity to present again a memorandum that we had worked on with the Bar Council 5 years ago, well, 6 now. And that memorandum actually detailed out many issues, which my organization C4, IRA's organization, the Bar Council, and 1 or 2 other groups actually drafted a very comprehensive document that was recommending for the MACC to be lifted to a constitutional commission, and that its chief commissioners would need to go through a very rigorous appointment process, which had public consultation, which means if you're interested or I'm interested to apply for it, there's an opportunity. And there would be a screening process probably at Parliament Select Committee level before the actual name is submitted. So it does not, in the current context, means that the civil service would actually move up through rank and file, because the MACC also needs to be able to hire experts. It's a very, very complicated subject matter, this corruption, especially when it involves cross-border stuff and all that. You know, you need forensics experts, you need accountants, you need many things. So MACC must be able to have that kind of independence, and not civil service coming up through the rank and file through the
That's right.
public.
A much more vibrant leadership.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
So
Thank you.
we have a full proposal, and
So this
we
full
want the
proposal
Prime Minister to take it seriously.
Yes, once again, you just mentioned that this was about 6 years ago, and also you'd also mentioned that we've had about 3-4 governments in the meanwhile. Dr. O, moving from there into the fact that how do you feel we can reform the MACC when perhaps an independent inquiry might be the last thing that we're moving towards, looking at the sentiment from the government side of things?
You see nowadays, MACC, it's under the, if I remember correctly, the Prime Minister's department. In fact, I still remember when I was working in the Prime Minister's office, whenever there's a so-called post-cabinet meeting or post-cap meeting, almost all of the senior officers of the Prime Minister's department, including the Chief Commissioner of the MACC, will be attending a post-cap meeting. So therefore, very much the Commission and also its senior officials are part of the government. And in a sense, they are like investigating their fellow civil servants and officers and so on. So sometimes you just don't see the independence there. And there are, of course, conflicts of possibility or conflicts of interest. So somehow you need to make, for example, like what Cynthia mentioned, namely to perhaps constitutionalize the commission such that it is independent of the executive power. Some would say park it under parliament, but in this country, we don't really have a true division of powers. In my humble opinion, the executive and the legislative are actually sort of fused. Whoever gets the most seats in parliament becomes the prime minister, right?
So fused is a very good way of expressing it.
You put it under parliament, it's still under the same, roughly group of ruling coalition. So you need to truly make it independent and very, very, very powerful commission. It must have its own prosecutorial powers. It does not have to refer it to the Attorney General, maybe for opinion only, but it can actually prosecute the potential perpetrator itself. And over the past, shall we say, decade or so, we have seen, for example, politicians who are temporary in the opposition, for example, for the moment, then they are prosecuted for various corruption offenses. Then when they become government, it's the reverse. The other side will be prosecuted and so on. So I think a lot of people would see, like this sort of corruption prosecution as being very much politically motivated. And this sort of perception, I think, would need to be somehow cleaned up by means of granting more independence to the commission.
Yeah, thanks for that, Doctor. I think you raise a very important point there, whereby it is often seen as corruption persecutions are politically motivated. Ira, your thoughts on public sector corruption and looking at the frameworks that we have in place that actually embolden it, and what can be done to perhaps improve and reform this with regards to MACC?
Yeah, so I mean, so I'll start with one good thing. I wouldn't say good thing, but one positive one positive thing about public sector corruption is it is the corruption is sort of measurable. So the CPI, for example, measures public sector corruption, right? And it is constantly in the news, and Azam Baki is by no means the first very senior public official to be accused of such practices. As opposed to private sector corruption, which I think is even more difficult to quantify and to monitor and to prosecute. So that's one thing about public sector corruption. But secondly, I think the whole process, as I mentioned just now, is not designed for accountability, right? So the MACC, right? MACC investigating itself. The public, the PSC on agencies not being able to have that sort of like a convening power, like a court, right? Like issuing a subpoena, like you have to come. You can't say that, oh, I don't want to come because it's going to be sub judice and all these kinds of excuses. So I think with the thing with public sector corruption is, how do we design the entire system to be more accountable? And we were talking about MACC independence, right, through our proposal of making it into a constitutional commission. But there's a whole slew of reforms that needs to come together with whistleblower protection. We've seen how the whistleblower who wrote the 2 articles have now been sued by Azam Baki. So whistleblower protection in Malaysia is extremely weak. We don't have asset declaration laws either. So a whole slew of other reforms needs to come into place together to strengthen the whole anti-corruption ecosystem in Malaysia. So the MACC is extremely important, but there are also a lot of other reforms that needs to happen. The other thing that's really important is also the Attorney General's chamber. So Dr. O mentioned about the prosecutorial powers, right? So by right, the AG's chambers, the AG is supposed to be separated from the public prosecutor. So in Malaysia, again, the AG and the public prosecutor is fused into one person. So, how can the legal advisor to the government also be a prosecutor at the same time, right? So, and you'll run into problems exactly like this, which is what happens when someone in a very high position of power is accused of corruption, right? So, all of these reforms need to move together, and freedom of information is another one that we do not have, right? So everything is an official secret. You will be arrested if you leak documents, as we have seen happen so many times. So why is it that the entire ecosystem is just not designed for accountability? So all of these reforms, I think, need to go hand in hand together, and there needs to be awareness about how important all of these reforms are, even from the politicians themselves. So I do know that asset declaration is a really hard sell for politicians, right? So yeah, a lot of politicians don't want that, resist that, and say that, oh, if I reveal my assets to the public, my children are going to be kidnapped and all these kinds of excuses. So why is it that we still have this kinds of normalization of this kind of secrecy of public officials, for public officials, our elected officials, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, so I think this is something that we need to realize, that all this slew of reforms needs to come together actually at the same time, really.
Thanks for actually giving us a good little nutshell of all of that. Cynthia, but focusing specifically on corruption accountability and the fact that the Whistleblower Act plays such an important role within that. Very quickly, could you give us some of your thoughts on some of the conditions within it that are bizarre?
Sorry, Sam?
Some of the conditions within the Whistleblower Act that are actually quite bizarre and sort of actually prevent citizens from performing.
Yeah, I mean, as was already described a little bit by Ira also, the Whistleblower Protection Act was very much enacted as part of our obligations to the UN Convention Against Corruption.
Correct.
So that's the context. When Patla, during his premiership, he signed on that convention. And one of the obligations is for countries to enact the Whistleblower Protection Act. So we have one. And unfortunately, it wasn't something that helped protect whistleblowers. So as Dr. O also said that, you know, it's very dangerous to blow the whistle. In fact, it's so hazardous. Right now, Azam Baki has filed a defamation suit against the person who exposed him. Now, why doesn't she have whistleblower protection? It's because she went to the media. And this is where it becomes so bizarre, because you can only report to the law enforcement. And in this case, you're talking about the law enforcement. You're exposing a potential malpractice of the law enforcement, of the MACC.
Such a
How can you go to
contradiction.
him?
Yeah.
You know, it's crazy that he would want to investigate himself. So in many other countries, the bizarre aspects are actually addressed when a whistleblower is actually allowed to, say, for example, go to their elected representative, like the member of parliament, etc., to be able to highlight the same problems. Another bizarre aspect of this law, now that was Section 6, that you can only go to the law enforcement agency. Another aspect is the whistleblower is often not updated of the complaint. So if it's an environmental issue, for example, and you're actually lodging a report on, say, black fumes coming out of a factory,
Sure.
and that could be something that involved illegal operations at night, and you know there was air pollution and so on and so forth. The company and its executives would probably know that the whistleblower came from somewhere within the locale, and it's very easy to pinpoint who are the vocal people, etc. And then you suddenly find yourself getting thugs throwing stuff into your house or threatening you and stuff like that. So the fact that there's no updates that are generated by MACC to the whistleblower, unless the whistleblower writes directly a letter to the chief commissioner, which is so weird. How would you even know that such a procedure was available, that you can only write to the chief commissioner and he may return the reply or not? Other than that, you get no information. So that's another very bizarre part. The other important thing, and I think for media practitioners to know this as well,
Sure.
because investigative journalists often run the risk of being slapped with defamation suits and all that, is that this act is subservient to the Official Secrets Act. So if you expose confidential government
It
documents,
can be struck
etc.,
out, yes.
Yeah.
you'll be charged because
That's
you're
right.
exposing classified info. So what whistleblower protection are you talking about? You know, and then the Sedition Act and all the other acts that come into play. So where does the Whistleblower Protection Act stand then in the armory of laws? It's a very subservient act which needs to be strengthened. And that process, after civil society making so much noise and banging on doors, etc., there is now an official task force in the Law Ministry that is studying the proposals and the details. And they've been studying it for a long time. We're wondering when will it ever go to Parliament and get tabled, you know, because it's not very complicated to actually expand. And in fact, we have done best practice examples of how it's done in Indonesia, in Taiwan.
Exactly.
You don't even have to go to Europe or the US. There's some very good best practices in Asia itself. So it's bizarre and it has to stop, you know, in that sense that we really have to start looking how to move forward, how to better protect the whistleblower.
And move forward we must. So with that in mind, we're going to take another short break, but stay tuned to find out what actually we can be doing as Malaysians and putting pressure for reforming the MACC with or without Azam Baki. Stay tuned for the last segment of Wacana Ed English. Welcome back to Wacana English with me, Tamina Kausji. Now, moving deeper into the discussion, I would like perhaps the top 3 recommendations from each of you for MACC to structure itself better. Ira, if I could begin with you.
Do I just have to stick to the MACC?
All right. Perhaps you could also give us a bit of a broader perspective since we want to look at accountability.
Yes, because as I said before, it goes beyond the MACC, right? So firstly, of course, our proposal to strengthen the MACC by turning it into a constitutional commission, I think needs to, more than ever, I think, needs to happen, right? So that's number one. Secondly, I mean, I would start with the lower hanging fruit. Give the Parliamentary Select Committee on Public Agencies real power to, summon public officials that are being accused of such corruption charges, right? And thirdly, freedom of information and also whistleblower protection. That needs to be strengthened. And, as Cynthia said, the law is currently being revised. So where is it? Why is it not being tabled in Parliament? So I would say that, the first is probably very ambitious, but I think the last 2 is extremely doable. And that needs to happen immediately. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Ira. Now, Dr. O, same for you. What would be your top 3 recommendations for institutional reforms looking at the public sector that could perhaps also improve MACC at the end of the day?
Well, I think I'm very much impressed with, I think, what is called the Sunshine Acts. For example, in some other countries, you could be a lobbyist very formally if you register as one, and then you could make political contributions to a certain party or politicians to whatever amount you would like to, but you will have to disclose that publicly. I think that would go a long way in terms of discouraging sort of the type of under-table payments and so on. Now, number 2, talking about under-table payment, recently I was struck by the fact that a friend of mine was supposed to examine the accounts of a company. He found an item very blatantly saying 20,000 under-table fees to a certain government officer. So, of course, he had to sort of
official
massage.
accounts.
Yeah, he had to sort of massage that away. But what I'm trying to say is, you see, for it has become part of our culture. It has been entrenched in our, at least business culture, that you need to pay government officials in order to get things done, right? So I think not to be passé about this, but really stronger public education effort I think will need to be undertaken, that with advancements in technology, for example, you don't need to pay such undertables anymore. Like nowadays, when we renew our passports, for example, right, it could be done in just a few hours instead of having to wait for a few weeks, and then maybe you need to do certain things to speed it up and so on. So Sunshine Act, this sort of public education efforts been renewed, and of course the various suggestions as to making MACC more independent and yet accountable to the people and by extension the government.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to dig a little bit deeper on one of the points that you made when it comes to stronger public education, because I think that what we see right now across Malaysia, every time there is a new corruption or transparency related case, there is a lot of public outrage. However, as you mentioned, and you made a great example of the fact that we can get our visas, our passports, etc., done in a couple of hours, but the expectation still lies with the public officials who want their hands greased. So what can be done about that?
I think it's also a question of amending some of our laws, because I think in a lot of our legal provisions, for example, the head of a particular ministry or department would have discretion as to whether to grant certain licenses, certain permits, and so on. So if we could get rid of those discretions and instead have very detailed steps as to what you should do in order to obtain those licenses, that will perhaps make another baby steps towards eliminating some of these needs to make the discretionary payments.
Discretionary payments indeed. Cynthia, your top 3 recommendations for bodies like the MACC and the MACC itself to structure itself better?
The problems plaguing the MACC are a reflection of a much bigger problem.
Absolutely.
And Dr. O is very right about how it has become so embedded that we have recommended several legislative reforms. But the question is whether there's political will to actually execute them. One of it, for public education, very important, is a right to information law. And if we have that, that could also counter then several aspects of the Official Secrets Act. In some countries, they have both, except that the exemptions of what becomes secret becomes much smaller. And
there's a way
right
to
to
balance,
information is something that empowers people because they can then apply for government information. And then there's also willingness of the government to create open data sets and everything. So that's why I say a lot of it is political will at the center of it. But one thing that for me needs very serious change, and I don't know how that's going to come about, is for public appointments not to involve the Prime Minister. So which means the Prime Minister cannot be the final person to decide who gets appointed to all these important institutions. Because political interference is a very serious clash in which conflict of interest can often arise. And in this case, conflict of interest becomes so real, and there's no law to punish conflict of interest. So whether you're talking about the nexus between politics and business, for example, where businessmen sometimes have so much money that you actually find a situation in which there could be state capture, so to speak, where they decide policies of the government because the government needs the money. And there are other types of conflict. In this case, if Azam Baki is conflicted and whether he should be engaging in business, although there are laws that says that you can, but to a very limited extent.
Yes,
and you have to declare your assets and so on. So we don't have many legislation to help check and balance that whole thing. And we do need to reduce the powers of the Prime Minister in terms of appointment of important positions. It has to be something which is a lot more accountable. The process needs to be something that the people can trust, can see that, you know, it's only people with merit and professional capacity that could be considered. Of course, you're talking about diverse societies or racial quota, gender balance, all that's very important, but it's about whether you can do the job, not about who you know that can give you the job. So this is a problem here, and I think Dr. Oh's point, very important about in the whole public procurement system, there isn't really anything legally binding to manage the situation. So you have all kinds of circulars, but who's following the rules anyway? You know, and that really is the problem. So there's many things to fix, but we need to get the people in power. And I think GE15 coming is a huge opportunity for the rakyat to tell the candidates and the politicians, if you're going to represent me, then you should, you know, fulfill 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because if not, I'm not going to vote for you.
That's right. Show me your clean books, right? Okay, so from there, we've actually got some comments from our YouTube viewers. Thank you so much for your input so far. I'll direct this one to Ira. Viewer comment says, corruption is the new norm in the country. Is this true?
I don't think it's a new norm. You know, I think our conversation today has shown how deeply rooted it is and how long it has existed in our society, right? And, you know, it's a combination of the weakness of our institutions and also the sort of kind of, you know, the sort of the public condoning it almost, right? And, you know, all of that comes together to create an ecosystem that's, like I mentioned before, not designed for accountability. And I think it's an interesting question because, you know, my fellow panelists have brought up the elections, right? And, you know, and I keep thinking back at how in the previous general election, the G14, our opposition then went on, you know, a campaign against Najib, right? So, you know, 1MDB, Najib was such a huge campaign tool. And you know, went around the country explaining how, you know, Najib was stealing money and all that. And, you know, and that did manage to raise a lot of anger amongst the public. But thinking about it now, right, was it hatred and anger at Najib or was it at corruption, right? So I think those are two different things, right? And I think what our politicians on, you know, whichever side has not managed to do is to actually really show the public, you know, what corruption costs us, what corruption costs you as a citizen, as a taxpayer, as, you know, someone who, you know, contributes to society. And this is what corruption is doing to you. So I think that message needs to come out a lot stronger. And, you know, and I think the other thing is also, you know, a lot of Malaysians, I think, expect, you know, a lot from their politicians, right? And what do I mean by this? I think in Malaysia, we have a culture of, you know, of VIP pleasing, right? And I think this is endemic in our society. And how do we sort of get Malaysians to really understand that, you know, our politicians, our public officials are accountable to us? You know, they are there. Their job is to, you know, to serve the public, to be a public officer, and to carry out your job with integrity. And if you don't carry out your job with integrity, there are consequences, right? So Malaysians need to start seeing your public officials and your elected representatives as that, right? And not as someone who, you know, when goes down to your kawasan and gives you a couple of packets of rice, and you'll be happy with that, right? So society, I think, needs to look at our public officials in a different way. You know, they are there to play a role for us and play that role with, you know, with the utmost integrity, or there will be consequences. So that kind of accountability is also a mindset. It's also how you see your country, really. So I think this needs to come up, I think, in the next elections, and public expectations of our officials need to change.
And perhaps Malaysians need to start owning that as individuals rather than waiting for political parties to put that forth as an agenda, perhaps. Dr. O, what really interested me about Ira's answer was about the cost of corruption. Let's look at that and the fact that one of Malaysia's biggest selling point over the decades has always been, political stability, because we've just had one ruling party. Of course, that's completely, changed over the past decade or so. Now, when it comes down to the cost of corruption for the average individual, particularly in East Malaysia, in Sabah, in Sarawak, your perspectives on this?
Well, I happen to be originally from Sabah, right? I think in a large part of East Malaysia, and by extension the whole of Malaysia, we have this socio-economic dilemma. I think the proper term, it's called resource curse, right? We are blessed with a lot of natural resources, from oil and gas to various minerals and oil palms and so on. Unfortunately, it did not quite enrich the social economy of our population. And one reason for that is, of course, I think as mentioned before, there's a state capture, there's oligarchy, there's kleptocracy, and of course with corruption as the binding agent, right? So, and as a result, we wanted to become the developed country by the year 2020, and now it's 2 years past, and we are still sort of reeling in perhaps not so developing economy. Unfortunately, have been thinking hard about this, but unless, as we mentioned just now, the attitude would change a little bit on not only on the parts of the politician, but also on our own part, I think it's very difficult to sort of get out of this sort of dilemma. In Sabah, for example, I think there are various self-motivated communities. They were not necessarily rich communities. In fact, they are often very remote and poor communities. They came together, they formed what we call social enterprises, and resorted to essentially self-help. Instead of waiting for the government to bring the 2 katis of rice to you and so on, they, for example, form this sort of cooperatives for social enterprises in order to harness some of the local produce. And nowadays we have slightly more advanced technology to try to sell it overseas and so on. So I think this sort of bottoms-up approach hopefully can have a little bit of impact on our whole situation about rampant corruption. Yeah.
All right. Now, last thoughts from Cynthia, and then we'll end the entire discussion. I'd just like to ask you, do you feel that if we had, let's say, full reform of the MACC, would that ensure political stability for Malaysia?
Well, very much so. It will definitely help with the strengthening of institutions. But I just wanted to touch on one point on cost of corruption.
Right.
One very good index every year is the Auditor General's report. And last year, the Auditor General for 2021, he said something like about 620 million ringgit lost just to infrastructure projects. So we aren't even talking about other types of procurement of goods and services, etc. So the bill, the cost, could actually run into billions. And I believe that the MACC needs to be assisted by perhaps several other institutions, including the Auditor General. So this is actually very important for check and balance, stability. The Competition Commission, for example, in which you know that contracts were given out based on patronage politics as opposed to real fair trade and competition and so on. So these are definitely areas in which the cost of corruption can be managed better, not eliminated completely, because that would be something in the longer term. But I go back to the question of independent institutions actually being the key to political stability. We have seen that in the United States during the time of President Trump, We have seen that in other countries where, regardless of political party in power or who is the prime minister, if we have institutions that work, even parliament, if parliament is robust, now I think that point just now about the executive and the legislative being so intertwined does not actually allow that kind of fortification of parliament that we hope. But it's hopefully moving there. I mean, there are now select committees and all that. But what I did want to say was the institutions are key to determining the stability of the economy, of the politics, and the democracy of a country. So if the institutions were allowed to function independently and with sufficient check and balance of each other, we're getting there somewhere. And
That's
we
right.
will also have a public, people who might be a little bit more afraid to commit a malpractice because somebody is watching them, or they could be fined, as in like Singapore, you know, it's an enforcement society. You can't even jaywalk.
Exactly.
You'll be fined.
Thank you so
But
much for
is
that,
that where we
Cynthia.
want to go?
Exactly.
You know, that's
So
another
let's take those
question.
baby steps, perhaps, towards full maturity and adults in terms of nationhoods as well as citizenry. Thank you so much, panelists. You've all been brilliant. Those were some great insights. We hope that it actually does lead to actionable change, but bringing it back to the core issue. Let's also not forget that in addition to the ongoing COVID pandemic's economic impacts, Malaysia's poverty line currently still stands at 2,208 ringgit a month, while minimum wage, on the other hand, is 1,200 ringgit. So with these continued issues of corruption, accountability, transparency coming up, it makes it more and more critical that Malaysia's government of the day and any future government of the day also continues to take positive steps towards reducing economic inequity and ensuring economic justice for every single Malaysian out there. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you also for your inputs and insights. Do follow us on all our platforms, Sinar Daily My. And also, right before I sign off, Happy Chinese New Year to all our viewers out there celebrating. Kong Hei Fat Choi, as well as happy holidays to everyone. I'm Tamina Kausji, signing off on Wacana English. We'll see you again next round.